Welcome to Feeding the Family with Dr. Kristen, where we help you navigate the challenges of feeding your family and learn about the role food plays in our health and relationships. Feeding and food relationships can be stressful, confusing, and even destructive. I'm Kristen Saxena, a pediatrician and mother of 4 who's been researching and sharing what I've learned about feeding for over 10 years. In this podcast, I'll share my experience and expertise to help our kids and ourselves with everyday survival tips for real parents. This podcast is about progress, not perfection. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to Feeding the Family with Dr. Kristen. My name is Kristen Saxena. I'm a pediatrician and a mother of 4 kids, ages 6 to 13. And I have been researching feeding, family feeding, and nutrition for kids for over 10 years. And I'm excited to start this podcast to be able to share that information with all of you. If you have a family, you know that it can be very challenging to know how to feed your kids, what to feed them. There's tons of conflicting information about what they should be eating, what they should not be eating. And all of us really just want to make sure our kids are getting what they need to grow optimally and that they're developing healthy habits and a healthy relationship with food and their bodies for the future. And so I really want to be able to use this podcast to help you understand what are the best approaches that we can take to make those things happen. I also understand that as adults, a lot of us are dealing with our own issues with food, with our own body images. And so what's the best way to approach that when we might be dealing with some of these challenges ourselves? As a physician, I've come to understand that a lot of the current models that we use to advise people on how to eat healthy, how to feed their families in a good way, they really aren't working. To be honest, in medical school, you really don't learn that much about nutrition, certainly not a lot about feeding a family. And what you do learn is very prescriptive. So you might learn what's the appropriate number of calories for a baby of a certain age to eat, or what are the essential vitamins and minerals that a baby needs to grow. And that's very important information, and it's really good to know, but it doesn't really translate to real life, to parents feeding their kids. And when I was a pediatric resident, and I started to see families and kids in clinic, I started to see that almost every family that would come to visit me for their well visits had some question about eating or feeding their child. They often had lots of concerns. Was their child eating enough? Were they eating too much? Why were they only eating 4 foods and wouldn't eat anything else? And at the same time in residency, I actually had my first child. So I had my own son. And I started to have those questions for myself as he started solid foods. I thought, what is the best way to feed him? I started to realize that the prescriptive methods didn't work. So before I had kids, I think I would wonder, we told them what they should be eating. Why aren't they doing it? And then I had my own child and I said, how does anyone do this? And so I started to have questions of my own. Fortunately, one good thing that happened during that time was we had what they call a lunch and learn. So in a lunch and learn, you bring all the residents in, you entice them with food, and we'd all come to lunch and they'd bring in a speaker who was going to teach us on some topic. And that particular day was a woman who had been a family practice physician and kind of pivoted her career to help families who were struggling, a lot of times with kids that had very picky eating habits or other sort of significant feeding concerns. And one of the really interesting things that she taught us was that perhaps the approach of what the child is eating is not the way to go, but to look primarily at how are we feeding our families, how are we feeding our children. And she talked a lot about structure and what they call a division of responsibility in feeding. Basically, what are the parents' jobs and what are the child's jobs? And so for the parents, it would be what are we going to eat, where are we going to eat, and when are we going to eat? And the child was allowed to decide what they were going to eat of whatever was offered and if they were going to eat at all. And it sounds very simple, but for most of us, if you think about the way that you feed your family, that might not exactly be the approach that you're taking. And I thought it was very interesting, and I started to apply that to the conversations I was having with families in clinic and in my own home with my own children. And I found that it really did seem to work. So there was a lot less stress at mealtime, a lot less battles, a lot less sitting, waiting for someone to finish their vegetables, and everyone ending up unhappy at the end of the meal. And I also noticed that kids really were eating a wider variety of food when you kind of took this approach to feeding. And it caused me to continue to have these conversations with the families that I interacted with, to continue the practice at home and to do more research into, what is the best approach to take as parents to feeding our kids. The other thing that I have learned is it's really about progress and not perfection. Even with all the research I've done and everything I've learned, I still struggle at home. Kids are always getting older, so as soon as you think you've got things figured out, things change, and all of a sudden you're adrift again. And as a parent, I completely understand that. But I do want to be able to share what I've learned and some of the expertise I have with you and help you to make that progress in your own life. I'm excited about the opportunity we're going to have to converse with a lot of experts in the field. I know I still have a lot to learn, and I'm excited for us to learn together. And I want to hear from you. So please submit any questions that you have. You can literally ask me anything. Submit your questions to the drkristinpodcast at gmail.com, or follow us on Facebook or Instagram and submit your questions there. I'm super excited to embark on this adventure with you, and we'll chat again soon.